Hello students, I'm Himani Sharma, your UGC NET Paper 1 educator. The lecture plan that we have for you, the last lap, which will be really beneficial for you to crack your UGC NET 2023 examination. So this is a new lecture, a new video for you to bring forward from our end for you all the PYQs, that is the previous years or the past year questions, along with certain important concepts which are really important and significant from the examination point of view. So before wasting any time, let us just look forward to the first question that we have. What is a hypothesis? So our hypothesis is a certain and established finding, a part of the research question, a strategy of evaluating data, or a tentative statement which provides an explanation. So, as always, I would like to request you all to pause your videos here and see what do you think is the answer here. So, the answer to this question is option D. A hypothesis is a tentative statement providing an explanation, right? How is that? Tentative means a temporary statement which is there. So, let us just see here what we have for the explanation. They usually use these words. So, you have to memorize certain keywords for certain concepts, right? So, coming back to the features of a hypothesis. What is a hypothesis? How can it be formulated, right? So, first of all, the basic definition is that it is a tentative proposition. It is a temporary statement which we are going to see through our experiment that it is true or not. So, basically, we are going to accept it or reject it, right? The validity of this hypothesis is unknown because of the fact that the experimenter, the researcher, has not yet conducted the experiment. So, obviously, he will not know if the research is valid, if this hypothesis is valid. So, for that, he or she will have to, do or conduct the research. In most cases, formulating a hypothesis specifies the logical relationship between two variables. What are those two variables? The two variables are independent and dependent variables. Correct? So, independent variables are the ones which are known as the cause of something, and dependent variables are the effects, the outcomes. Correct? So, with the usage of a hypothesis, we want to see if there is a relationship between the two variables which are there. Also, the hypothesis must be generalizable. If the findings turn out to be true, you are supposed to generalize those findings on the general population. We have talked about that how there are samples, population, and from the population, a person draws the samples, right? And when the research is conducted, the research is done, you are supposed to generalize those results, right? So, a hypothesis should be generalizable as well. It should be simple and not written in a complex manner because of the fact that the person whosoever is reading your research, whosoever is seeing that research or wants to do it, he should know what is the crux of the experiment that you have done. Now, let us just look at the example that we have here. If not studying lowers test performance and I do not study, then I will get a low grade on the test, right? Which means that this statement is simple in its nature, right? And it is generalizable for the fact that if for the first time I haven't studied and I scored less marks, the second time if I won't study again, I will score less marks. So, the things are being generalizable here, right? So, here we are going to see the relationship between, you not studying and the test performance. So, here the independent variable is not studying, right? And the dependent variable is the test scores. So, if you don't study, the effect will be seen on the test scores and the effect is the dependent variable, correct? What is the purpose of a hypothesis? We have talked about what are the features. Now, what is the purpose? Why do we need a hypothesis when we want to do a research? To find the answer to a question. A hypothesis is a statement which lets us to answer certain questions, certain problems, right? Like we saw in this very example that I wanted to see the relationship between independent and dependent variable. How could that have been done? With the usage of a hypothesis only. It defines the relationship between two variables, as I told you, the independent variable not studying for a test and dependent variable, that was test score. The hypothesis is testable because you can see if you do not study, right, what effect does that have on your test scores. So you can test this thing, right, because you will receive a score on your test performance. It is measurable, it is quantifiable, because you can compare test scores received from when you did study versus when you did not study. So you can see if that thing has an effect on you or if that did not, right? Next question that we have here is, at the stage of data analysis in which quantitative techniques have been used by a researcher, the evidence warrants the rejection of null hypothesis. Which of the following decisions of the researchers will be deemed appropriate? So, pause your videos, look at the options that we have here and try to answer the question. So, the answer to this question is option B, that is rejecting the null hypothesis and accepting the substantive research hypothesis. Before jumping on to the description of this very question, the explanation that we have here, one should also know that whenever we conduct a research, we have two types of hypothesis. One is null, the other is alternative. Null in the examination can be signified by H, O or 0, and alternative is signified by H by 1 or H, A. Correct? It means that if you see these things in the question papers, don't be worried, because you now know that if this is written, they mean that alternative hypothesis. If H and subscript 0 is written, you know that it means null hypothesis. Coming to the question back again, it is an important factor for you to know that whenever we talk about the null and alternative hypothesis, right, let's just look at the definition of a null hypothesis. The simplistic definition is that it is the opposite of alternative hypothesis. How? And if we talk about null, if we say that certain things are null and void, it means they are nullified, they do not hold any value, correct? So, same is the case with the null hypothesis, which the researcher tries to disprove, that is nullify, reject or nullify, as I already told you. That through the usage of a null hypothesis, the researcher would like to say that yes, there is no differentiation between the two of the things, right? So, null hypothesis should always be there in your research, so that if some other thing happens, you can accept or reject it. So, an important point here is the null often refers to the common view of something, as I told you, is often the reverse of what the experimenter actually believes. So, if you believe that a fertilizer has an effect on the plant growth, you will prove that it does not, you will say that it does not have an effect on the plant growth. That will be the does not wali statement, will be the null hypothesis for you, right? Because you want to reject it, you want to disprove it, correct? Alternative hypothesis is the opposite of the null hypothesis, right? It reflects that there will be a difference, that there will be an observed effect for the experiment and the observations are the result of a real effect. So, if I told you that the fertilizer does not impact the plant growth, this is the null hypothesis, but the researcher, as a researcher, I believe on some other thing. Hence, I am giving the null hypothesis because I want to disprove it. I will disprove it how? Through my experiment showing that yes, putting a fertilizer, that is the alternative hypothesis, putting the alternative hypothesis that we have, putting the fertilizer in the plant has an effect on the plant growth, right? So, because I want to see that my alternative is true, that if I put fertilizer in the plant grows fastly, I will give a statement that is null in its nature, and that hypothesis will be known as null hypothesis, correct? So, coming back to the question here again, they will try to give you this much descriptive, question, because they want to confuse you. So, try to break it down into pieces and see. Here, if we do not even read the first part, we see from here only the rejection of the null hypothesis. So whenever the null will be rejected, the alternative will be accepted, right? And vice versa, right? So if the null is rejected, which type of hypothesis will be accepted? The alternative. So the option that we have here is rejecting the null and accepting the substantive research hypothesis. Now you may ask that there is no alternative hypothesis written here, but they have written substantive research hypothesis. But alternative hypothesis is also known as substantive research hypothesis. Correct? So you will see that if a researcher rejected the null hypothesis, he obviously is going to accept the alternative hypothesis, right? And if something other happens, you are going to do the same. If you accept the null hypothesis, you are going to reject the the alternative hypothesis, right? Now, difference between the two here with an example here only. Null, if one plant is fed club soda for 1 month and another plant is fed plain water, there will be no difference in growth between two plants. This is what the researcher wants to disprove. Correct? So he will obviously say that there is no difference between the two things whichever are given there, right? But the alternative hypothesis on the other hand says that if one plant is fed club soda and the other plant is fed plain water, the plant that is fed with club soda grows better than the plant with plain water. So you see the alternative is here, right? And it says that the plant with the club soda is, the one which grows faster, correct? So if you accepted the alternative, then obviously you are going to reject the null hypothesis, which says that there is no differentiation between the two. So you are going to reject it because you wanted to prove this very thing, prove this very alternative hypothesis, right? So you are going to accept it. I hope I'm making things clear to you, right? This is such a descriptive concept there, but I have tried to make it easier for you because we are supposed to revise the concepts, right? Then the next question we have here is based on null hypothesis, and I'm sure you'll be able to solve it. A null hypothesis is when there is no difference between two variables. A null hypothesis is subjective in nature, is the same as the research hypothesis, or when there is a difference between the variables. Pause your screens and look out for the answer what you think is the correct one here. So the answer here we have is option A. In the previous slide only, I told you that the null hypothesis wants to prove that no differentiation is there. No difference between the club soda and the plain water has on the plant growth, right? No observed effect is there. That is a null hypothesis when it says no differences between the variables, correct? Then we have next question. Male and female students perform equally well in a numerical aptitude test. This statement indicates a research hypothesis, null hypothesis, directional hypothesis, or statistical hypothesis. Again, pause your screens and answer the question. The answer to this question is option B. Because here only we are seeing that male and female perform equally well. So if there is no difference, if the results are equal, it means that the hypothesis that we are talking about here is null hypothesis in nature. If it would have been, the statement would have been males scored better than females in a numerical aptitude test, that would have been the alternative hypothesis because it shows the differentiation between two variables which are there. Next question that we have here is, which of the following statements is true in the context of testing of a hypothesis? Pause your screens. This is a question which I haven't even explained till yet. So what do you think would be the answer here? The answer here is option B. It is only the null hypothesis that can be tested. So if you talk about the null hypothesis, right, whenever a researcher wants to conduct a research, he will provide us with two hypotheses. As I told you, one will be null, the other one will be alternative hypothesis. One that he wants to disprove, and the other which he will accept, right, which he believes in. The researchers believe. Correct? So these are the two kinds of hypotheses. But which hypothesis I am going to check? This is the null hypothesis, because every time you are going to test this so that you can show that yes, there is a relationship between the two variables, right? Because the null says no differentiation is there, so you would want to check it. You will like to check and test it, and then based on that observation, based on that experiment, you are going to say that yes, my alternative hypothesis is true because of the fact that I have tested the null hypothesis. And always and always, mind you students, this is a really important concept. You all should know that it is always the null hypothesis which will be tested and not the alternative or any other hypothesis. Always and always the null will be tested. Then we have an investigator commits a type 2 error when she read the options and see what do you think, what do you acquire from the previous information that you have of the types of errors. The answer to this question is option D. Accepts a null hypothesis when it is false. We, when doing research, obviously can commit certain errors, right? In research, those errors are, divided or subdivided into two categories. Let us just see. Hypothesis testing, as I told you, not perfect. So, we talk about there are two types of errors, which is type 1, right, and type 2. They have alternative names as well. So, type 1 error is also known as alpha error and is symbolized by, represented by this very symbol of alpha, right? On the other hand, if we talk about type 2 error, it is known as beta error and represented by the beta symbol. Correct? Moving forward, if we see when a person commits, there are two types of error. When a person commits type 1 error, what happens? And when a person commits type 2 error, what happens? So, first of all, we will be doing type 1. When type 1 error is committed, right, as I told you, it is also known as alpha, represented by alpha symbol. It occurs when the null hypothesis is rejected, although the hypothesis was true. So, look here in the example. This is the null hypothesis which says that men don't reproduce, which means that men cannot be pregnant, right? Which we know that it's true. But when it is rejected, in spite of it being true, then what kind of error is committed? Type 1 error. I will repeat this again for you because students tend to get a bit confused between these two types of errors. If the null hypothesis is rejected, even if it was true, then we would have committed what kind of error? We have committed type 1 error, right? So, rejected. So, we can write here for the easiest part, true, rejected. So, here you can see the hypothesis was true, but it was rejected. Coming to the type 2 error, which is also known as the beta error, represented by this symbol, it says when there is not enough evidence to reject the null hypothesis, even when it should factually be rejected. So, false accepted. right? So here true is rejected. True, the hypothesis was true, but it was rejected. Here, the hypothesis was false, but we did not have enough evidence to, reject it, so we accepted it. Let's just do this with the help of an example only. So the hypothesis was women cannot be pregnant. This is obviously a wrong statement. Women can be pregnant. They are the reproductive creatures, right? So if we talk that this one thing should be rejected, but we by mistake have accepted this woman who is sitting pregnant and the doctor told her that you are not pregnant, shows that we did not have enough data to reject it. So we falsely accepted. Even the null hypothesis was false, we accepted it. Correct? So in this video, what have we done till now? We have talked about the features of hypothesis. Correct? How it should be testable, how it should be measurable, it should be simple in nature, and most important thing, hypothesis is a tentative statement or proposition. Correct? So we have done this thing. We've also talked about the null and alternative hypothesis. Right? So if null is the one which shows that there is no differentiation between the variables, and it is the one which is always and always tested, right, to show that there is no differentiation, so that the researcher can reject it to prove what he wants to prove, right? So what the researcher wants to prove will be the alternative hypothesis. What the researcher wants to disprove will be the null hypothesis. Then we talked about the two types of errors. Alpha, which is type 1, and beta, which is type 2. Correct? So these were the things that we did. I have a quick question for you before I end this video. The question is that there is this hypothesis which says, I have made a hypothesis which says that a new medicine reduces the chances of heart failure. Correct? So comment down below and let me know, what do you think would be the null hypothesis and what would be the alternative hypothesis, so that I can know that you guys have gotten and understood this very concept really easily, right? We will be moving forward with certain more PYQs and more important concepts when it comes to research aptitude, ICT in higher education in my videos, right? So I'll be seeing you guys in the next video. Till then, keep on smiling, keep on studying. We'll meet again. Thank you so much.